So today we're diving into the incredible life of a man who actually became a god, the god of medicine to be exact. And let me tell you, his story is just packed with genius, compassion, and some truly legendary house calls. Let's get into the story of Bao Shangdadi.
You've probably seen statues just like this one in temples, right? They look so serene, so dignified, and they're obviously deeply revered. But have you ever stopped and wondered who was the actual person behind the legend? Well, today, we're going to peel back 1,000 years of myth to find the brilliant man at the very heart of the story.
And what a story it is. I mean, we're talking about a guy whose life, and afterlife for that matter, involves doing eye surgery on a dragon, scolding a tiger into becoming his bodyguard, and even getting into a centuries-long weather feud with Mazu, the super powerful queen of heaven. Are you intrigued? Because you really should be.
All right, Section 1, the prodigy doctor's choice. We're going to start at the beginning, with his origins and a huge decision that would basically define his entire legacy.
From the very get-go, this man was something special. His real name was Wu Tao, born way back in 979 AD. He was a true polymath, what we'd probably call a slash youth today, someone with a ton of different talents. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already mastered these incredibly complex medical books, but he didn't stop there. Nope. He was also an expert in astronomy, geography, and architecture, just a total genius. So this brings him to a major fork in the road. With a mind like his, he had two very different paths in front of him. See, he'd passed the tough imperial exams, so he could have easily become a high-ranking official. We're talking power, prestige, a nice steady government salary. But instead, he chose a completely different route. He decided to become a humble countryside doctor, dedicating his life to serving the poor. He literally walked away from it all because he loved medicine and helping people.
And that choice is what led to the incredible stories that turned him from just a great doctor into a full-blown legend. Which brings us to Section 2, treating legendary patients.
First up, the case of the dragon's eye. So the legend goes, a patient shows up in terrible pain, but Wu Tao, with his crazy insight, immediately sees through the human disguise. He just calmly says, "You're a dragon, aren't you?" The creature then reveals its true form, and without even hesitating, Wu Tao uses medicine and acupuncture and cures the dragon's eye. Seriously, imagine having that on your patient list. And then we've got case file number 2. A ferocious tiger choking on a bone from a woman it had eaten comes to him for help. Now get this. First, Wu Tao actually scolds the tiger for its bad behavior. But then his compassion kicks in. He says, a doctor's heart is like a parent's, and he bravely reaches right into the tiger's mouth and pulls out the bone. From that day forward, that grateful tiger became his loyal protector. And that's exactly why you so often see a tiger statue right at the foot of his altar.
Okay, now before we get to his most famous human patient, you have to know about this mind-blowing technique, suspending thread diagnosis. It's basically the ancient version of remote healthcare. The claim was that he could diagnose a patient just by feeling their pulse through a long silk thread. Sounds impossible, right? Well, he had to prove it on the biggest stage you could imagine. And this brings us to the ultimate medical test. He gets called to the imperial palace to treat the Empress Dowager. But there's a catch. Customs forbid a commoner from even touching her. So, out comes the silk thread. But the court eunuchs, they're super skeptical, and they decide to trick him. First, they tie the thread to a wooden pole. Wu Tao feels the pulse and says, "This is the pulse of wood." Next, they try a cat's paw. He just sighs and says, "This is the pulse of a cat." They finally give up, attach the thread to the Empress, and boom, he makes a perfect diagnosis and cures her right on the spot. He was the real deal.
But now, let's look at a more personal side of his mythology. Because it seems, even as a god, he had some very human feelings. Let's talk about Section 3, a divine rivalry.
Okay, so this whole rivalry is wrapped up in a popular folk saying people use to describe the wild, unpredictable weather in the third lunar month. The first part of the saying is, Bao Shangdadi's wind, and the second part is Mazu's rain. Now, Mazu is the immensely powerful goddess of the sea. So what's the connection between these two?
Well, the story goes that Bao Shangdadi and Mazu once thought about getting married, but in the end decided to just stay colleagues. But apparently there were some hard feelings left over. So now the story goes that on Mazu's birthday procession, he sends a strong wind just to blow off her hat. And in retaliation, on his birthday, she sends rain to wash off his ceremonial makeup. It's this wonderful folk explanation for that crazy spring weather, all framed as a divine little tiff between two of heaven's biggest celebrities.
So that covers the ancient history and myth.
But what about today? That brings us to Section 4. The doctor is still in. Let's see how his practice has evolved for the 21st century.
You know, his worship has always been incredibly practical. For hundreds of years, his temples basically acted as community health centers. They would give out what are called pharmacopoeia slips, which were essentially prescription guides for common problems, suggesting gentle, easy-to-get herbs. This was a really vital form of healthcare guidance long before we had modern medicine.
And believe it or not, he's busier than ever today, just with a different kind of caseload. You've got medical students praying to him for success in their exams. You have families visiting before a loved one has major surgery, asking him to guide the surgeon's hands. And people who are dealing with long-term illness come seeking spiritual comfort and strength. His role has really shifted from being the primary physician to being the ultimate guardian of health.
So let's bring all this together to really understand the heart of his legacy. Section 5, a legacy of compassion. This, right here, is the true source of his enduring power.
Wu Tao passed away at the age of 58, and the story of his death perfectly captures his life. He fell from a steep cliff while he was out gathering medicinal herbs for his patients. He was a healer, completely dedicated and selfless, right up until his very last moment.
The core of his entire story, really, from mortal doctor all the way to a mortal god, is this. His true power wasn't in some kind of magic, like healing dragons or diagnosing through a silk thread. It was in his boundless compassion. He healed anyone who needed it, whether it was an empress or a peasant, a human or an animal. That was his divinity.
And that's his timeless appeal. He represents the ultimate ideal of a healer, someone who is skilled, wise, and above all else, just deeply compassionate. Which leaves us with a final thought. If you could speak to the divine doctor today, what health blessing or piece of wisdom would you ask for?